Hello. After listening to the story, write your impression in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I stumbled into the apartment around midnight, exhausted and relieved all at once. A week of prepping for this big event at the restaurant was finally over, and the weight of it was just starting to lift off my shoulders. Some rich group had rented out the whole place for a celebration, and between coordinating the menu, last-minute changes, and endless hours on my feet, I was completely drained. I was honestly expecting to come home to a dark, silent apartment and climb straight into bed, especially since Stacy and I had a small spat that morning. You know, the kind of pointless argument that happens when you've been cooped up in your own routines for too long. Something about me not folding the laundry or leaving the bathroom light on all night. It seemed ridiculous now. To my surprise, Stacy rushed up to me as I stepped through the door. Her arms wrapped around me before I even managed to put down my bag, and she was smiling like nothing had happened. The warmth of her hug caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but smile back, thankful that whatever tension had been there earlier seemed forgotten. "Hey, I ordered pizza," she said, pulling back just enough to look up at me. "Thought you could use a break from cooking for once." The offer was tempting, considering I'd been in the kitchen practically nonstop for days. Stacy wasn't much of a cook herself, but she knew I didn't mind. I was glad she hadn't attempted anything ambitious tonight, though. I didn't have it in me to even pretend to enjoy a home-cooked disaster. "Go shower," she insisted, giving me a gentle push towards the bathroom. "I'll get everything set up in the living room, and the pizza should be here any minute." After a quick shower, I felt more human and less like a walking zombie. As I made my way back to the living room, I noticed Stacy setting out my favorite candy next to a couple of glasses of soda on the coffee table. She glanced up at me, her eyes twinkling. "Thought I'd sweeten up the night for my sweet-toothed boyfriend," she teased. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. I stayed in the living room, catching my reflection in the hallway mirror. From where I sat, I could see Stacy greeting the delivery guy. She was smiling, maybe a little too much, and her voice had that playful tone she sometimes used when she was trying to get out of trouble. "Hey there. That was fast," she said. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost or something." The guy chuckled, holding out the pizza box. "Nope, just made it here in record time for you." "Thanks," she replied, lingering for a moment before finally taking the box. "Have a great night," she added, tossing him a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't like Stacy to flirt, at least not openly. And sure, she'd always had this way of being friendly that some might mistake for something else, but this felt different. I shrugged it off, figuring it wasn't a big deal. As she walked back in, Stacy caught me watching her. "What?" she asked, still smiling. "Ready to dig in?" She dropped the pizza on the coffee table and sank into the couch next to me. The smell of the pizza mixed with her favorite perfume, something sweet and floral that she always wore, like a signature. We started the movie, one of those silly romantic comedies Stacy loved. Halfway through, there was this scene where a guy was trying to cover up an affair. It was meant to be funny, the way the husband kept fumbling around with lies and excuses. Out of nowhere, Stacy nudged me with her elbow. "He kind of reminds me of you, you know," she joked, a mischievous look in her eye. "Me?" I laughed. "How so?" "Just saying," she smirked. "You're out late all the time. Who knows what kind of double life you're leading?" She giggled, clearly thinking it was harmless. And well, you know girls, they like to tease, not just Stacy. It was just a joke, right? But as the movie went on, she didn't stop. Every time the guy did something shady, she'd make another crack about me and the long hours I'd been working lately. "Maybe you have a whole other girlfriend you're cooking for," she said, rolling her eyes. "Come on, Stacy," I muttered, trying to brush it off. "You know the restaurant's been crazy this week. It was a big event, and we had some important clients. I didn't have a choice." Yeah, she replied, waving a hand dismissively. "Whatever you say, Brad." Her tone was starting to grate on me, and I could feel my patience slipping. After the 6th or 7th jab, I finally had enough. "All right, Stacy, that's enough. What's your problem? You know I've been at work. Why do you keep going on about it?" She snapped back almost immediately. "Well, maybe if you weren't always getting home so late, I wouldn't have to wonder where you were all the time." I'm not just going to sit here and wait for you to decide when it's convenient to be around. I stared at her, feeling the irritation rise up in my chest. Are you serious right now? You know why I've been working late. It's not like I'm out at some club or sneaking around behind your back. I'm doing this for us, Stacy. Right? She scoffed, getting up from the couch and shutting off the TV. Well, you're clearly tired, and I'm done with this conversation. She grabbed the leftover pizza, threw the empty candy wrappers into the trash, and started towards the bedroom. Good night, darling, she added, putting just a little too much emphasis on that last word. I sat there, staring at the blank TV screen, unsure of what had just happened. I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Stacy was on the other side of the bed, her back turned to me, and the space between us felt miles wide. I was used to falling asleep with my arms wrapped around her, her head resting on my chest, but now it was like there was an invisible wall keeping us apart. Even though I was exhausted from work, my mind kept racing, replaying our argument over and over. Why was she so angry? I hadn't done anything wrong. At least, I didn't think I had. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. But underneath my frustration, there was a pang of something else, hurt. I sighed quietly, my thoughts drifting back to when things were easier between us. Before these little fights had become a regular occurrence. We'd been dating for 3 years, but it still felt like yesterday when we first met. It was at the restaurant, the very place I'd come home late from tonight. I was cooking there even back then, working my way up to becoming one of the senior cooks. Stacy had come in with a friend, and she caught my eye almost instantly. She was sitting at a table near the kitchen, and every time I glanced out, there she was, laughing and talking animatedly. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose braid, and I noticed the way she gestured with her hands when she spoke, like she was acting out a scene from some play. I remember asking the waiter who served their table if she'd left a number. He just laughed and told me, "You want her number? Go ask her yourself." So, I did something I'd never done before. I walked up to her table after my shift and struck up a conversation. It was awkward at first, but she was sweet about it, even teasing me for being nervous. I found out she worked at a salon, doing manicures, and we ended up talking about the weird requests she got from clients. I still remember the first date. I managed to convince her to go on with me after that. We went to a cozy little cafe nearby, and I was so tense I could barely sip my coffee. Stacy just kept smiling, doing most of the talking, and that made it easier for me to relax. There was something about the way she carried herself, always put together and well-groomed, that made me feel like I was with someone who genuinely had her life figured out. And even though I stumbled over my words and felt like I was saying all the wrong things, she found my nervousness kind of charming. By the end of that night, we were already planning our next date. After we started dating regularly, I gave her a nickname, Stace. I know it's not the most original thing in the world, but it felt like it was ours. One day, early in our relationship, she was complaining about how nobody ever pronounced her name right. Stacy was often turned into Stacy or Stacy, and it bugged her. So, I just shortened it to Stace, and it stuck. Whenever I called her that, it was like a little reminder that she was mine and I was hers. Only I called her that. Nobody else did. It felt special, like something we had that nobody else could touch. My mind wandered to that time. I'd visited her at the salon after she'd been working there for about a year. Stacy was doing some regular clients' nails, and I showed up with coffee just to surprise her. The whole salon had burst out laughing because apparently, I walked in right as the client was talking about how she'd love to steal Stacy's cute boyfriend away. I remember Stacy giving the client a playful scolding, saying, "Hands off, or I'll mess up your manicure." Her cheeks were flushed when she saw me, but I could tell she loved the attention. It was a funny, harmless moment, but it showed how comfortable we'd gotten with each other, and how even the little things, like bringing her coffee, had become part of our routine. Recently, she started taking drama classes. It was something she'd always wanted to do since she was a kid, but life kept getting in the way. I was thrilled when she finally signed up, even more so when I offered to pay for them. She didn't want me to at first, but I insisted, telling her how proud I was that she wasn't just staying still, that she was still chasing her dreams. She'd only had 2 classes so far, but every time she came back from one, Her eyes were glowing with excitement, like a kid who'd just been let loose in a candy store. I glanced over at her now, lying with her back to me, and wondered if that light was still there. I hated these arguments. I hated not knowing if something I did had made her unhappy. We used to be so good at talking things through, and it felt like that had started slipping away lately. Amber was another thing that made me feel lucky. When I introduced Stacy to my sister, I was nervous. Amber could be protective, and I wasn't sure how she'd take to Stacy. But they hit it off right away. It was almost like they'd known each other for years. I remember one afternoon, the three of us went for a hike, and Stacy was struggling to keep up because she wasn't used to all the uphill climbing. Amber didn't hesitate to fall back and walk with her, chatting away like they were old friends. Ever since then, they'd become close. Stacy would sometimes go to the gym where Amber worked and take one of her classes. I liked knowing that the two most important women in my life were close. It just felt right. As I lay there, I couldn't help but think about what the future might look like. I'd been considering proposing for a while now. I hadn't picked out a ring yet, but I'd started browsing online, trying to get an idea of what Stacy would like. I knew it wouldn't be easy finding something as beautiful as her, but I was willing to look until I did. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I wanted her to know that I was all in, even if we had these stupid fights now and then. It's just a phase, I told myself. Every relationship has its ups and downs. We've been through so much together already. We could get through this, too. I just needed to remind her that she was still my Stace and that I'd do whatever it took to make her happy. I'd fix whatever was wrong. I was sure of it. Brad woke up to a quiet apartment. The empty side of the bed beside him felt colder than usual, and as he glanced at the clock, he realized Stacy had left for work. A part of him was relieved. He didn't have to face her sour mood just yet, but another part missed her already. He'd stayed up half the night thinking about her, about them. He still wanted to propose, still wanted to build a life together. He was sure she felt the same way. They talked about starting a family one day, about having kids and growing old together. Brad was convinced that these little fights didn't change that. He had the day off, so he decided to make himself useful. The apartment was in need of a good cleaning anyway, and he knew Stacy would appreciate coming home to a spotless place after work and her drama class. She'd only just started taking those classes, but she was already passionate about it. He loved that she was doing something for herself, pursuing her childhood dream, and he'd encouraged her every step of the way. Paying for the classes was the least he could do. With the cleaning done, Brad got to work in the kitchen. Cooking for Stacy was one of his favorite things. He'd always enjoyed the way she'd sneak up behind him while he was at the stove, wrapping her arms around his waist and kissing his cheek in thanks before they sat down to eat. And if he was lucky, sometimes those thank you kisses would lead to more than just dinner. As he chopped vegetables and stirred pots, he imagined tonight would go the same way. When Stacy came home that evening, her mood was written all over her face. She walked in with a scowl, her shoulders tense. Brad knew that look well by now. It usually meant her day hadn't gone as planned. Maybe someone at the salon had been rude, or her drama class hadn't gone the way she'd hoped. Either way, he had his usual strategy ready. "Hey, Stace," he said softly, walking over to greet her. He slipped his arms around her waist, pulling her into a gentle hug. "Rough day?" She let out a heavy sigh, leaning into his chest. "You could say that." Brad smiled, rubbing small circles on her back. Whenever she was in a bad mood, he'd always pull her close and hum a tune against her ear. It was silly, but for some reason, it worked every time. Stacy managed a faint smile and hugged him tighter, noticing the freshly cleaned apartment and the smell of dinner wafting from the kitchen. "You did all this?" she asked, glancing around. "Of course," Brad replied. "I wanted you to come home to a clean place and a good meal." Stacy kissed him lightly on the lips. "You're too good to me," she murmured. But even though she smiled, there was still a hint of tension in the air, like a thread pulled just a little too tight. They sat down to eat, and for a while, everything seemed almost normal. The food was delicious, as always, and Stacy seemed to appreciate the effort. But Brad knew they needed to talk. He set his fork down, taking a breath. "Stace, we need to talk about last night," he said quietly. "I don't understand why you were so upset. I only love you, and those jokes about me cheating, they hurt." His voice was calm and steady, but there was a slight tremor beneath it. Stacy looked at him, a hint of guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, though it came out more like a formality than an expression of real regret. "I guess I've just been having mood swings lately. It's probably just hormones or something." Her apology didn't quite ring true, and she seemed to realize it. Without giving Brad a chance to respond, she leaned across the table and kissed him. He started to speak, but she kissed him again and again, until they were stumbling toward the bedroom. The next couple of months passed without any major issues, but Brad could feel that things weren't quite as they used to be. The tension from that argument slowly faded, and Stacy stopped making sarcastic comments about cheating or expressing jealousy. There had been a time when she'd get a little possessive, playfully accusing him of flirting if a female customer at the restaurant complimented his cooking, or insisting on coming along to the gym with him to keep an eye on things. It had never been serious. She always said it with a teasing smile, and Brad knew she trusted him. It was flattering in a way, like she wanted to remind everyone that he was taken. But lately, she hadn't made those comments at all. Still, life felt routine. Stacy went to work and her acting classes. Brad went to the restaurant. They hung out with friends when they could, but those outings were few and far between. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't great. The spark they'd once had was still there, but it wasn't burning as brightly as before. Brad started talking to Amber more often, telling her about his plans to propose to Stacy. He knew Amber would be thrilled, and she was. She gave him advice on picking out a ring, suggesting styles she thought Stacy would like. He also confided in his aunt, whom he was very close to. She'd always been like a second mother to him, and he valued her opinion on almost everything. His aunt shared some stories from her own marriage and reassured him that every couple went through rough patches, that love was about sticking together even when things weren't perfect. One night, Stacy casually brought up the idea of taking a vacation abroad. "We could use a break," she'd said, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "Maybe go somewhere like Paris, relax for a while." The idea stuck with Brad. Paris, the city of love. It would be the perfect place to propose, maybe even in front of the Eiffel Tower like something out of a movie. He could already picture Stacy's expression as he got down on one knee. But there was another side to their conversation that nagged at him. Stacy had also asked for money to buy some new clothes. It wasn't the first time he'd paid for her shopping, and he didn't mind treating her now and then. But this time, the items she wanted were pretty expensive, luxury brands. Still, he reasoned, they weren't struggling financially, and he'd been saving up bit by bit for the proposal. Brad continued meeting up with Amber, discussing the details of how to make the proposal unforgettable. Sometimes, they'd just chat about life in general, and those talks helped him keep a clear head. He was determined to make Stacy feel as special as she deserved. He'd make that moment perfect, and then everything would finally fall into place. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. Brad was exhausted, but he was determined to make everything work. With Stacy's desire to go on vacation abroad and his plans to buy an engagement ring, he'd taken on extra hours at the restaurant and even found a part-time job on the side. He worked tirelessly, often clocking in well over 60 hours a week. His aunt, who lived in Europe, had been giving him tips on how to make the proposal extra special, but Brad hadn't told anyone else about his plans. Not even Stacy knew how hard he was pushing himself to make everything perfect. One evening, after another long shift, Brad came home to find Stacy in a chatty mood. Their relationship was steady, nothing extraordinary, just the routine of daily life. They had settled into a rhythm, but Brad could sense a slight strain that lingered from time to time. Stacy's mood swings had subsided somewhat, but there were still moments of tension that he couldn't quite put his finger on. So, today at rehearsal, something interesting happened. Stacy began as she recounted her day. "We were doing this scene, and I had to kiss a guy. Well, it's just part of the production, you know?" There was a strange tone to her voice as she emphasized the words, "kiss a guy," her eyes flicking to Brad, as if waiting for a reaction. Brad's face remained neutral. "I get it," he said simply. "It's work, part of what you signed up for with the acting classes." He shrugged, thinking of famous couples who had dealt with far more intense scenarios. For example, if Angelina Jolie had been jealous of Brad Pitt every time he filmed a love scene with another actress, they'd have never lasted as long as they did. In Brad's mind, trust was essential, especially when one partner's profession involved close interactions like that. But Stacy wasn't done. "Do you even care?" she snapped, her voice rising a little. "I kissed another guy." Brad rubbed his temples, the weariness of a long day weighing on him. "So what? It's your job. I know how theater productions work," he replied calmly. Stacy's lips curved into a mischievous smirk. She stepped closer to him and kissed him on the lips. "That's how I kissed him," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then she kissed him again, more slowly this time. "Or maybe that's how we kissed." She leaned in a third time, this time parting her lips slightly. "Oh, wait, he did this with his tongue." Brad just stood there, bewildered and too tired to play along. He didn't know what she was trying to prove, especially since her sarcastic teasing didn't make sense to him. "Yeah, the guy's lucky to kiss such a beauty. But I get to kiss you every day," he said, trying to lighten the mood. After that strange exchange, days went by with the same pattern. Brad buried himself in work, constantly tired but determined. Stacy seemed distant, and though they went through the motions of daily life, there was still an undercurrent of tension. He thought about what might ease the strain between them, something to break the routine and bring back a bit of their old spark. One day, Brad decided to surprise Stacy. He bought her a small gift, an elegant silver bracelet she had once admired in a shop window, and a bouquet of her favorite flowers, white lilies. He thought it would make her smile, help her see how much she meant to him, and maybe ease whatever tension lay between them. But as soon as he walked through the door with the flowers in one hand and the gift in the other, Stacy's face twisted into an expression of shock and anger. "You brought me flowers and a gift? What did you do, Brad?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp, almost accusing. "Did you cheat on me and decide to come clean? Or have you been cheating all along and just can't keep up the lies anymore? Let me guess, you're about to say, 'Stacy, darling, forgive me. I messed up.'" Brad froze, the bouquet still held out like a peace offering. "What are you talking about?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "I just wanted to make you happy." Stacy's eyes flashed with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "Don't play dumb, Brad. You've been coming home late for weeks, you're always texting or calling someone, and now you're bringing me gifts out of the blue. It's like you're trying to cover something up." Brad felt his stomach drop as he realized how it must have looked to her. In his attempts to make everything perfect for their future, he hadn't considered how his extra hours at work and secret planning with Amber and his aunt might seem suspicious. But he was doing it all for her, for them. "I'm working so hard because I want to make you happy, Stacy," he said, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "I'm trying to save up for us to take that trip you wanted. And I'm planning to propose." The words hung in the air like a lead weight, and Stacy's expression immediately shifted from anger to shock. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She stared at Brad for what felt like an eternity, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the bedroom and closing the door behind her. Brad stood in the hallway, the flowers still in his hand. He wanted to follow her, to explain everything, but something stopped him. He felt like he'd just given away his secret too soon, like the proposal he'd been working so hard for had already been tainted by the distrust and accusations. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong between them, something that no amount of gifts or flowers could fix. The silence between Brad and Stacy hung heavy in the air after their last fight. When Brad had blurted out his plans to propose, the moment had come crashing down in the worst possible way. Stacy's reaction, or lack thereof, had left him feeling raw and hollow. She hadn't said anything meaningful, just a curt, "okay," before retreating into herself. Since then, the apartment felt less like a shared home and more like a place they both just happened to live in. The days blended together in a painful blur of unspoken words and quiet routines. The once loving exchanges between them had faded to awkward glances and mumbled greetings. They went about their daily lives without discussing much of anything. Stacy spent less time at home, coming back from rehearsals later than usual and leaving early for her shifts at the salon. When they did see each other, it was often just to sit silently at opposite ends of the couch, staring at a movie neither of them cared to watch. Brad would sometimes try to start a conversation, but it always died out quickly, like a match burning out before it could catch fire. Brad wasn't sure what to do. He felt lost, like he was walking through a fog where every step took him further from the life he had wanted. The excitement about proposing had dimmed into a painful uncertainty. The ring was still hidden in his sock drawer, but each day he hesitated to take it out and ask Stacy the question that had once seemed so right. Now, he wasn't even sure if they could make it through a single night without some kind of tension rising between them. He was exhausted from all the work and the constant effort to keep things together, and Stacy seemed so far away that he didn't know how to reach her anymore. One evening, Brad's sister Amber stopped by to check in. She noticed the strain in his voice whenever they talked on the phone and sensed that things were not as smooth as he had led her to believe. "Hey, big brother," she greeted him, walking into the living room and taking in the clutter that had started to accumulate. "You look like you could use some company." Brad gave a tired smile. "Yeah, things haven't exactly been great," he admitted as they sat down. "Stacy and we're just not talking much. It's like every time I try to fix things, it just gets worse." Amber listened intently, giving him a supportive nudge. "Maybe she's just stressed out. I mean, rehearsals and work can be a lot to handle, right?" she suggested, though she knew there was more to it than that. "Maybe," Brad said, rubbing the back of his neck, "but it feels different, like she's not even trying anymore. She's always gone, and when she's here, it's like she's just somewhere else." Amber furrowed her brow. "What happened? I mean, something must have triggered this. Did you two have a big fight or something?" Brad hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, we had an argument a while back. I told her I was going to propose, and it didn't go the way I thought it would. She seemed, I don't know, distant, almost like she didn't want it. Did you ever think maybe she's just scared? Sometimes people react weirdly to big changes, especially if they're not prepared," Amber suggested, trying to put a positive spin on things. "Maybe," Brad repeated, though deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Over the next few weeks, the distance between him and Stacy only seemed to grow. She was hardly ever home, and when she was, it felt like she was in a hurry to leave again. Brad started noticing small changes, Stacy dressing up more often, even on days when she said she was just going to rehearsal, and little things that didn't seem to fit. Her phone, once casually left on the coffee table, now stayed in her bag or pocket, and she seemed more guarded, as though there were things she didn't want him to see. They continued their silent routines, occasionally breaking the ice with a shared meal or a movie, but even these moments were strained. One night, while they were sitting on the couch watching a show, Brad reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. It was like holding a stranger's hand, one that used to fit perfectly in his but now felt unfamiliar. He glanced over at her, noticing how her eyes stayed glued to the TV screen, unresponsive to his touch. He tried different things to bridge the gap. One weekend, he suggested a day trip to the countryside, just to get away and clear their heads. Stacy had hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. But when the day came, she said she wasn't feeling well and ended up staying in bed. Another time, he planned a surprise date night, making reservations at a restaurant they'd been talking about for months, but Stacy canceled last minute, claiming she had a last-minute rehearsal. Brad didn't know if it was just life wearing them down, or if there was something deeper happening. There were moments where he thought about asking her directly if there was someone else, but the fear of hearing the truth kept him silent. After all, they had been together for years. He trusted her, or at least, he thought he did. Stacy's late nights continued. She would come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, or with her hair slightly disheveled as if she'd been in a rush. When Brad asked about it, she'd brush it off, saying she was just tired from a long day. But there was always something in her eyes that didn't sit right with him, a flicker of guilt or hesitation. Still, Brad held on to the hope that things would get better. He kept telling himself that the proposal would change everything, that maybe the tension would dissolve if he could show Stacy how much she meant to him. But as more time passed, the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach only grew stronger, and Stacy seemed to be slipping further away. One evening, Brad came home earlier than usual, feeling drained but hopeful about making dinner together. He opened the fridge and noticed some of the groceries he'd bought were still untouched, as if Stacy hadn't eaten at home for days. He looked around, the empty apartment echoing his own loneliness. As he set the table for two, a message popped up on his phone. It was Amber, checking in again. He replied quickly, trying to distract himself from the emptiness in the room. But as he did, a thought crept into his mind, one he'd been trying to ignore. Was there more to Stacy's absences than just work and rehearsals? He pushed it away, telling himself not to jump to conclusions. But deep down, a part of him knew that the tension wasn't just from stress or the proposal. It was something else, something that was slowly unraveling everything they had built. Brad felt like his heart had been yanked out of his chest. He had watched from the window as Stacy kissed another man, a stranger to him, but someone who clearly wasn't new to her. The image replayed in his mind as he stood there, frozen, his phone still pressed to his ear as his friend kept talking on the other end. He couldn't respond. His world had just shattered in front of him. The night stretched on in suffocating silence. Brad stayed up, pacing back and forth in the dimly lit living room, waiting for Stacy to come home. He had thought about calling her, demanding an explanation right there and then, but something stopped him. What could she possibly say that would make any of this make sense? Besides, he doubted she would even answer the phone. She had already shown where her priorities lay. It was nearly dawn when the front door finally creaked open. Stacy walked in casually, like it was just another late night. Her hair was slightly tousled, her makeup smudged in a way that suggested something more than a simple rehearsal. As she set her purse down and noticed Brad standing in the middle of the living room, she froze for a second, then put on a mask of indifference. "So, you're up late," she said flatly, almost dismissively, as if they were just talking about the weather. Brad's voice was low and filled with a cold edge. "I saw you," he said simply, his words hanging in the air like a dagger ready to drop. "I saw you with him, Stacy, at the entrance. I saw everything." Her expression hardened as she crossed her arms over her chest. "Oh, you saw, huh?" She shook her head with a humorless chuckle. "Well, I guess there's no point in pretending then." He took a step forward, his voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. "Who is he, Stacy? Who the hell is that guy?" "His name's Jimmy," she said with a shrug, as if she were introducing an old friend. "He's the guy I kissed at rehearsal, the one I told you about, remember? The one you didn't seem to care about." Her tone was laced with accusation, like she was blaming him for her actions. Brad's stomach twisted. "And you just kept kissing him? Is that it? You've been sneaking around behind my back?" "Oh, don't act so surprised," she shot back, her voice rising. "What did you expect, Brad? You're always at work, always busy, always doing something else. And then out of nowhere, you dropped this bomb about wanting to propose. What was that supposed to be, huh? Some grand distraction? Were you trying to hide something?" He stared at her in disbelief. "Are you kidding me? You think I'm cheating? That's insane. I've been working extra shifts for you, Stacy, for us. I've been trying to save for a vacation and for a ring because I thought you were the person I wanted to spend my life with." Stacy scoffed and rolled her eyes. "Right, sure. I've heard all the stories, Brad. How guys cheat and then propose just to cover it up. You know, to distract the girl from all the late nights and secret calls. The proposal is just a shiny band-aid for the truth. So forgive me if I wasn't falling for your 'I'm working late' excuses." Brad shook his head in frustration. "You're unbelievable," he whispered. "So that's your justification? You assumed I was cheating, so you just went ahead and did it yourself?" Stacy's eyes flared as she took a step closer. "It's not just that, Brad. Jimmy, he's actually there for me. We've been spending time together, and it wasn't long before I realized that he gets me in ways you never could. We have more in common than you and I ever did." Brad clenched his jaw, struggling to keep his composure. "And what does that mean? You've been seeing him this whole time?" "Since the day you mentioned the proposal," she admitted with a cruel honesty. "It wasn't planned, but I guess it just happened. He kissed me during a break at rehearsal, and it felt different, more exciting. We've met up a few times since then. Had some fun." She said the last word with a sickening emphasis, her eyes narrowing as she watched Brad's reaction. Brad felt a surge of anger well up inside him. "You've been sleeping with him," he said, more a statement than a question. "Yeah," she replied bluntly. "We've slept together, multiple times. And honestly, Brad, Jimmy's just better. A better kisser, a better lover. He's not tired all the time. He actually pays attention to me, and he doesn't bring flowers home out of guilt. His fists tightened at his sides, his heart pounding. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" he asked, his voice low and trembling. "You're throwing away everything we've built for some guy you barely know?" Stacy let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe it's because what we've built wasn't that solid to begin with. You've been distant for months, Brad. Always at work, always too tired to notice that I was lonely. And now, I'm supposed to feel bad for finding someone who actually makes me feel alive." The venom in her words stung deeply. "So what now?" Brad asked. "Are you just going to leave? Walk out and be with him?" "I've thought about it," she confessed with a cold bluntness. "Jimmy and I have so much in common. Acting, music, even stupid little things like movies. He's spontaneous and passionate, things you used to be, but now you're just predictable. I don't know. Maybe I'm ready for something different." Brad's voice cracked as he tried to keep his composure. "So that's it then? You're done? You're just going to throw us away like we were nothing?" Stacy shrugged, her expression unyielding. "I don't know, Brad. Maybe I'm done, or maybe I'm not. But at least now, you know the truth. I'm not going to keep pretending everything's fine." She turned and walked away, leaving Brad standing there, drowning in a sea of emotions: betrayal, anger, despair. He watched her go, feeling as though the ground beneath him had given way. The woman he thought he knew was gone, replaced by a stranger who had no qualms about tearing his heart to shreds. And as the silence of the empty apartment closed in around him, Brad realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur for Brad. His world seemed to have been flipped upside down in an instant, and he struggled to make sense of it all. Stacy's betrayal hung in the air like a dark cloud, and the words she had thrown at him during their last confrontation echoed relentlessly in his mind. Despite living under the same roof, they barely spoke. Brad had tried to reach out to her a few times, hoping to salvage something, anything, from the ruins of their relationship, but it was always met with indifference. Stacy acted as though she had already moved on, and perhaps she had. Brad's work shifts at the restaurant became longer. He couldn't bear the thought of coming home to the emptiness that awaited him, and he needed the distraction to drown out his thoughts. On one of his few nights off, he called his sister, Kate, to confide in her. She had always been the one person he could open up to, and he desperately needed her support now. "Brad, you need to take a break," Kate said firmly over the phone. "Come stay with me for a few days. Get away from there. It's not doing you any good." He hesitated at first, but the thought of escaping the suffocating atmosphere of his apartment was too tempting to resist. So, he packed a bag and drove to his sister's place, about an hour away. Kate welcomed him with a warm hug and a sympathetic look that only made the ache in his chest grow stronger. For the first time in weeks, he was able to breathe without feeling crushed by the weight of Stacy's betrayal. Kate listened patiently as he recounted everything: Stacy's suspicions, the confrontation, and how empty he felt inside. "I just don't understand," Brad said, his voice cracking. "I thought we were solid. I was planning a future with her, and she was out there, doing that behind my back." Kate's face hardened with a protective anger. "She doesn't deserve you, Brad. It sounds like she was just looking for an excuse to justify her actions. I know it's hard, but you've got to let her go. You deserve someone who values you, not someone who's going to throw you away for the first shiny new thing that comes along." Brad stayed with Kate for a few days, allowing himself the time to clear his mind. It was a relief not to have to worry about running into Stacy at every turn. He started to feel a bit more like himself, though the scars remained. Kate's encouragement and support helped him regain some confidence, and he began to think about his life beyond the mess Stacy had left behind. 3 weeks after leaving Stacy behind, Brad returned to the apartment to find a note taped to the door. It was from Stacy. She had moved out and taken most of her belongings with her. The note was short, almost dismissive, stating that she was staying with Jimmy for a while. She claimed it was for the best and wished him good luck with the rest of his life. Brad stared at the note for a long time before crumpling it up and tossing it in the trash. It was a cowardly end to everything they had shared, but at least it was an end. There was no turning back now. With a newfound sense of determination, he began the painful process of moving on. He redecorated the apartment, filling it with new furniture and decorations that reflected his style, not the remnants of a life built for two. It was a small step, but it helped him reclaim a piece of himself. Months passed, and as the seasons changed, so did Brad. He immersed himself in his work and hobbies he had neglected, playing guitar, hitting the gym, even learning to cook new dishes. He kept in touch with friends and reconnected with people he hadn't seen in years. The memories of Stacy and the betrayal started to fade, no longer the sharp, searing pain they once were. But just as he was beginning to feel at peace, Stacy unexpectedly showed up at the restaurant where he worked. She was standing outside, nervously shifting from one foot to the other. When Brad walked out during his break, she approached him with a hesitant smile. "Hey, Brad, do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice almost timid. Brad looked at her with a mixture of surprise and indifference. He hadn't expected to see her again, and frankly, he hadn't wanted to. "What do you want, Stacy?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. She sighed, wringing her hands. I made a mistake. Okay? Jimmy and it didn't work out. He's not who I thought he was. I was wrong about a lot of things, and I've missed you." Brad's face remained expressionless as he listened. He waited for the anger, the sadness, or any of the emotions that had consumed him when she left. But there was nothing, just a quiet, distant acceptance. "Stacy, I've moved on," he replied calmly. "You made your choice and I made mine. Whatever you had with Jimmy, that's your business. But there's no going back to what we had. It's over." Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to plead with him. "But Brad, we could start over. I know I messed up, but I'm willing to work on things. We had something good." "No, Stacy," Brad interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "We didn't have something good. What we had was an illusion. I loved you, yes, but what you did showed me that you didn't value us the same way I did. I deserve better than being someone's backup plan." She looked as though she was about to protest, but then stopped. There was a resignation in her eyes as she realized that nothing she could say would change his mind. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Brad nodded. "So am I," he said, turning to walk away. As he headed back inside, he felt an unexpected sense of relief, as if a final weight had been lifted. He hadn't needed Stacy's apology to move on. He had done that already, but hearing it solidified the fact that he was finally free from the emotional prison her betrayal had put him in. Weeks later, Kate invited him to a party at her place, where he met someone new, a woman named Lily, who worked in the same industry and shared his interests in music and film. They bonded over stories and laughter, and for the first time in a long while, Brad felt that spark again. It wasn't forced or rushed, it was genuine. As he and Lily spent more time together, Brad realized that sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another, one that he could write on his own terms. He didn't know what the future held, but whatever it was, he was ready for it. And with that, he walked forward, leaving the past behind, knowing that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it.